Hi and welcome to RCKicks. On today's show, well, we're going to be doing a detailed build of this beautiful new in-box TRF501X. It's one that I've wanted to get my hands on for a while after doing the DB-01 and really enjoying it. So I wanted to see what it's like to actually build a TRF car, as that's a whole different genre of cars that I've never really gotten into. So I managed to find this one. L&L Models managed to source it for me at a reasonable price, as a lot of people want to sell these for stupid money. And if you're going to build it, then obviously you're going to lose a lot. But being that this box is a little bit tatty and a lot of the actual parts are just inside the box, it suits me perfectly, as I love to build cars. I don't like to collect new in-box boxes. Anyway, to give you a little bit of a backstory about this, if you don't know about this car, is in 2006, a prototype version of this entered the IFMA world. Now, unfortunately, we never really got to see it run in anger, as the finals were all rained off. So they kind of defaulted back to the times that were set in the qualifying, and it was given second and fourth position, but we never really got to see it to honestly know where it would have gone. Now, my plan was I wanted to see what one of these is like around the track, but I don't want to build up a new in-box mint one as a perfect shelf queen and then take it and run it and damage it, as there's just not that many mint ones around, and a lot of these that are new in box never get built because you lose quite a bit of money. So in my wisdom, I actually bought another one. Yes, I've got a well-used one that I've been slowly restoring off camera, as well, as my plan for this series not only is to do a detailed build of a new in-box one, but I want to take one and give it a bit of a blast to see how it goes, as the DB-01 Durga that I had performed a lot better than I expected. Granted, I had to modify it quite a lot, but I really wanted to see what the difference between that was and something like this. But first, let's not jump the gun too much. First, we've got to build this one up, so that's what we're going to do. So let's unbox it, lay it all out, and make a start. Now we kick off on stage one, where we're basically building up the motor mount. Now, as you can see, this is some beautiful anodized bling for you, and this kit is full of it. You can see where the money's gone. I mean, look at that. It's absolutely stunning. Now, the bearings that you see in the middle are keeping the belt in place once you put the spur gear into the actual center section, which is kind of clever. Being a race buggy, you don't want the belts to jump or slip at all, so that really helps keep everything nice and buttoned up. Now, this is 100% going to be a shelf queen, but I'm not going to build it up totally dry, as I don't like the way it sits when it's got no oil in the suspension. So I do plan on putting oil inside the shocks, and I will grease up the diffs a little bit, but I'm not going to use Loctite throughout this kit. Now, if you were building this up to take it racing, being that there's so many alloy parts, you would 100% want to be Loctiting up quite a bit, otherwise it's just going to rattle loose the minute you go around the track. So the manual headers start in the middle of the car, so we built up the motor mount and the slipper housing, so before you know it, we're turning our attentions to building up the slipper. Now, this goes together easy enough, but when you go to fit it to the actual chassis itself, you've got to attach the belts first before you drop it into the cage, because you can't add the belts afterwards because they're a loop. But because of the belt carriers, it means getting the belts in can be a little bit tricky, and you want to make sure you don't get anything crimped before you put the holding plates in place, as if you screw them all up and then you go to test it and you find it's crimped one of the belts, you're going to be undoing them straight away. Now, I found with this chassis, as well as the DB-01, what you want to do is keep checking to make sure everything flows freely. There should be no stiffness in the actual drive line at all. If there is, something's not quite right, so stop and backtrack a little bit. Don't just push on and try to figure out what's going on later on, as you're going to make it a lot harder for yourself. Now, this car comes standard with bull diffs, but you can modify it to run gear diffs. My other car has a gear diff in the rear, but I did have some problems with clearances, so I think you've got to kind of mess around a little bit to get the gear diffs to work. Now, one thing that was a bit of a shame to see was the diff nut is plastic. Now, if you remember back to the TD4s and the TD2s, they kind of suffered with issues with it being plastic. Sorry to interrupt the 501X build, but I just wanted to let you know tonight, yes, as this video drops on the 22nd of December, someone is going to win a new inbox one of these, a Kyosho Turbo Optima, probably the best vintage re-release build experience that I've ever had. So if you'd like to be in with a chance to win this, comes with free shipping. Well, you better get a move on. Well, at the end of the video, obviously, don't do it right now. But tonight, the 22nd of December, someone is going to be adding one of these to their collection for less than the price of a coffee. Also, as a massive thank you to everybody, there is some free raffles as well, so you can get your tickets for nothing. Just Google RCKicks raffles or head over to the link in the description in this video. Well, that was a bit intense. Anyway, carrying on. Now, I don't know whether one of those alloy nut upgrades would actually work in this kit as well. I'm not sure. It's very close, but I didn't have one spare to check myself. Now, checking the diff tension is easy enough. As per the manual, you just use 2 Allen keys and then just try and twist it. And if you've got any slip, you just need to tighten it a fraction. But don't worry, worst case scenario, you can adjust it in the car without dismantling it later. Now we turn our attentions to step 5, where we're building up the rear tower. We just attach the carbon upright to the lower mount, and then we can start building up the rear diff housing. Now, one thing when you look at the design of the driveline and how the belts work, it's all kind of very open. So you would think it's kind of easy to change belts, set tensions and things like that. But they hadn't really figured it out. Setting the tension on these belts, it can be a real faff. Also, the way that the belt wraps around certain parts means that if you wanted to take the belt out or replace it, it's a little bit more work than you would think. And it's the same for tensioning the belts. You've got these cams that you have to rotate to get them in the right place. Now, adding a mark to the top of them really helps line them up properly, as the only way you can really tell that they're lined up correctly and you've got one exactly the same as the other is by looking on the side, which is a really small indicator. So by marking the top, you kind of know you're in the ballpark, because if you put it all together and then you check it, you'll notice that one might be rotated more than the other, and you'll be dismantling all this part all over again. Now, the easiest way to fit this top brace and tie rod end, as it's got 3 shims underneath those 2 screws, is to lay it on its side, then turn the chassis on its side, slide it in, start screwing it up, then turn the chassis flat. Right, now we've buttoned up the rear, we can do the same on the front. There's not that much difference between the front and the rear of the car. You build up your ball diff just like you did previously, and then we turn our attentions to building up the tower. Again, the tower is slightly different, but the same design principles. Also, we have to put together the steering as well, and then we can build up the front diff housing. Now, I'm happy to report that in this kit, when I built up the steering, I had no binding issues whatsoever. Sometimes you build up some Tamiya kits, and as you do up the bolts for the steering, it all kind of starts to bind, so you have to back things off. Not on this one. It all went together beautifully, and I had no issues whatsoever. Now, one thing I wish they'd have done in this, as well as the DB-01, is to add additional belt cams. That way that you could set the tension from the middle of the car instead of having to open up all the diffs again. As you can see, you've got a carbon top plate, a carbon tower, you've also got that brace where the tie rod's attached to. All that has to be lifted off just to set the belt tensions. So whereas if you'd just had a cam in the center, you could have just loosened it off, adjusted it onto the actual belt itself, and then done it up, and that would have been so much easier and faster. As tensioning it by using the cams around the diffs, it's just a lot more faff. As you can see, the steering is a clearance issue for the belt, so if you want to change this front belt, you're going to have to remove the steering. That's not the end of the world, as it's only 2 nuts, but all these little obstacles make it a lot harder to work on, especially if you're out racing and time is limited and you have something go wrong and you need to actually work on the car while you're out at the track. Now, I'm about to demonstrate this perfectly as why the design is a little bit clumsy for a race buggy. As you see, we have to put the ball diff in and then we set the tension. See, having those 2 lines helps you make sure that you don't rotate one slightly different to the other. So it's a great little tip. But you've got to check on the sides just to make sure you get it bang on. Then you have to put a carbon plate on. Once you screw this plate down, there's 4 screws at one end, and then you have to mount the tower at the other end, and that sandwiches the ball diff into place. Well, it turns out I've actually built that ball diff wrong. Yes, I've made a mistake, but I won't know until I fit the drive shaft. Then we have the tie rod top mount to put in with the 3 shims, and then we fit that to the car as well. So you see, anytime that you need to do anything to these diffs, you're having to do this procedure, and it's a pain, especially when you've just done it and then you realize you made a mistake and you've got to go back and dismantle the whole corner again to get access to the diff. Now, sure, there is a lot of cars that are a lot worse than this, but don't forget, this is supposed to be a dedicated race buggy. Right, now we build up the drive shafts, and this is super easy as the grease that you're using is very sticky indeed. So when you slide in that barrel, it will stay in place, and then you can just drop the pin straight through and then clean it up afterwards. Now, Tamiya have included quite a few shims in this kit to actually remove some of the slop. So make sure as you're going through the manual, you check, as you don't want to leave any of these small shims out, as when you go to drive it, it's not going to drive as well as if you had put all the correct shims in. In fact, you might actually have to go back and add some more shims, but that's a whole other story. And yes, normally for race buggies, you would go back and shim up any kind of slop that you found after you've built it. So we're on step 12 now, where we're basically building up the rear arms. Now these went together really easy. I didn't have any issues, but the actual pivot pins that go through have got quite a few shims. So make sure you don't leave any of those out either. And the last thing to do before we can put the rear arms together is to do the tie rods. Having the correct tools for this makes life so much easier, and it saves your fingers. Adding a little bit of lubricant to the tie rod threads makes them much smoother when you want to adjust them down the line. Now we can finally attach the rear arms, and this is where it becomes a little bit of a juggling aspect, as you've got to actually hold it all together to make sure you don't lose any of the shims from the pivot pins. But once you get it, you actually fit that final mount on the rear, add the 2 screws, and it locks everything into place. This is where I realized I've done something wrong, as you can see, it just doesn't line up. The drive shaft doesn't go into the outdrive correctly, and I'm thinking, what have I done wrong? Turns out I'd actually got the ball diff housing round the wrong way. I'd put the actual pin through the wrong side, and they are different. Each side of the outdrives is different. So what happened is the actual pin that goes all the way through was sticking out, and it was stopping the drive shaft from going in. So I had to undo everything, change that, and put it all back together again. Let that be a lesson to you. Make sure you put your ball diffs together as per the manual, not like me. Now, with that half an hour excursion out the way, we're finally back to step 14, where we turn our attentions to the front arms and the steering and the hubs. When you're fitting the pivot pin screws, don't over tighten them, otherwise it will start to bind. So you want them to be able to move freely. The arm pivot pins have a lot less shims in the front for some reason compared to the rear, so putting the arms together involves a little less juggling, trying to hold everything together without dropping anything. Now, have you raced one of these back in the day or recently? How did you get on? How did it get on carpet? That's what I'd like to know. And how tough was it? These lower arms are quite substantial, so be interesting to know how reliable this kit is once you start running it in anger. But if it's anything like the DB-01, I was pleasantly surprised just how good it was, considering it was never designed to run on carpet. Now, the chassis has 1 or 2 small design flaws, but overall it's a very beautiful looking kit, and having the front kind of mirror the rear gives the chassis quite an appealing symmetry. And if you're a sucker for Tamiya's blue bling, well, this kit's got a ton of it. Now that's done, it's starting to come together. After that, we've just got to fit a front bumper on. Now I'm kind of doing it the wrong way around, as I was working on the front and then it asks you to go to the back and then come back to the front, which was kind of weird. So that's why if you look at the manual in the top right hand corner, it looks like I'm doing the second stage first. Well, it was just easier. Anyway, after that's on, we then put the anti-roll bar holding plates in place. It doesn't come with the anti-roll bars, they're an optional extra, but you do get the mounts, so I fit them to the car so I don't lose them. Now we turn our attention to the rear, and this is lower skid plate that goes on. Pretty straightforward stuff, just 2 countersunk screws. And once that's fitted, we then fit the diff covers. There's 1 at each end of the car. It just slots straight in and then you do it up. Now on my other 501X, it's missing the front and the rear ones. So if you have these diff covers, let me know. I tried to have a look online, but I couldn't find them. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes there's a step that you really want to do even though it's out of order from the build manual, and I've really wanted to do these battery mounts. So we've kind of skipped ahead to step 29 to fit the battery posts and the battery covers, and then we'll go back again. Don't ask me why, I just really wanted to put these in. I got the feeling that maybe it felt like I was getting closer to the end, so that's one of the last things. Anyway, I did that, and then I went back to the manual and started building up the shocks. So don't judge me. Also, if you do the same thing, comment below, because it's a little bit weird. I can highly recommend, if you're building up shocks, to get yourself some green slime, as it really helps and cuts down on the potential chance of leaks that you're going to get, especially from a shelf queen if you've put oil in them. You don't want to go back to the shelf after a couple of months and found you've got a nice oil leak all down the shelf and all over the arms. And this stuff seems to really work. I use it on my race buggies as well. Definitely something I can give you a thumbs up for. I thought these were aeration shocks, as the caps have the attachment for where you'd screw through, but they're not. I was quite surprised at that. A lot of people obviously upgrade to the big bore shocks, and my other 501 has them fitted. Thinking about it, I wonder if you can drill through those caps and turn them into aeration shocks. Now, I think we're due another mistake. I think I've mixed up the gaskets between the ones that go on the top that you can see here and the ones that should be in the blue collars, which give a bit more friction around the thread so they don't just rattle up and down the outside of the shock housing, as they seem a bit thick. But they worked really well, and when I put them together, they actually went together without any issues, with no trapped air, no rebound problems. So I'm not sure, but I'm leaving them because I'm kind of happy with them at the moment, and being it's a shelf queen, it's fine. But the adjustable collars do seem to be a little bit loose. I just couldn't face dismantling them all over again, as they went together so well. Make of that what you will. Now we just got to attach the shocks to the bottom arms. Then after that, we turn our attentions to fitting the steering tie rods. They all clip together really nicely, as long as you put them on the right way around, that matches the rest. So we'll take it off and change it. After that, we can finally start putting the wheels and hexes on. Now there's a spacer that you must fit in before you put the bearing on, and then the hexes are on the front, and on the rear it's just pins, but there's a spacer to go in there as well, so make sure you put that in, don't leave it out. Then we just fit the rims. Now I need to get the correct tyres for this, but I managed to find some that are going to work, some Schumacher ones, but I'd like to replace them with the correct Tamiya ones. I had a quick look online, but I couldn't find anything available at the moment, as well as I need to order some foams for the front and rears. Now I'd like to fit some period correct Tamiya electronics in this, but it tends to be quite expensive and not the easiest thing to find. I will just put a random servo in just to tie up the whole steering, stop it from flopping around, but I only have a few servos and they're a bit too good just to go into a shelf queen. And with that, we have a stunning chassis all done. Next, we need to turn our attentions to the body, and a massive thank you to Chris over at Ginger Paint. He has his own YouTube channel where he painted these up for me.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Most people know me under my moniker of Ginger Paint for the past 20 something years,
as there is no way in hell that I could paint anything to this level. So obviously that saved me a lot of time, and I really wanted to have one of these bodies painted up like this, and it's just beyond my painting skills. Right, we still need to cut it out. We have to be careful. I don't want to trash it. So I need to take my time, as the last thing I want to do is mess this up. Also, we have some TRF decals. Now, there's no exact placement for these decals, so I kind of just winged it along the lines of what I thought worked. So there you go. What do you think? Absolutely stunning. Personally, always wanted to have one like this, and this will go into the collection. Nice build, pretty straightforward, apart from the odd silly mistake, but yeah, that's me more than the actual kit. That's just me not reading the manual where I should do. Now, in the next video in this series, we're going to do a few other things. I'm going to finish off this one and we're going to take it for a bit of a spin around the track to see how it goes. I've managed to get the problem with it binding fixed, so I'm happy about that. So I need to put some electronics in it, dial it in a little bit more before we go and put it around the track. But that will be a video that will be coming in early 2025. Not only that, the reason I got into these is because of the DB-01 Durga that's been on the show. So if you haven't seen those videos, I'll put a link up here, go check them out. And if you've been watching the show for a while, you'll know that I raffled it off, so I didn't have one. And I've kind of really got into these cars, so I bought another one. Yes, I have another Durga that's coming back on the show as well. Now, I have been tinkering with this off camera, that's why it's got a new body on it. Now, the reason that I got this and the justifications for myself is one thing that I couldn't get for the Durga that I upgraded on the show and raffled off was this very rare chassis. Getting this motor mount and this chassis is really hard. All the other upgrades are still tricky to get and expensive, but are possible. So now that I've got this one, and this is a DB-01 RR, which is pretty sought after. It's got all the suspension and a few upgrades that come with it as well. It doesn't have everything that I had on the other Durga, as I upgraded that, like the carbon towers and a few other carbon composite parts like the arms and stuff. But I will bring this back on the show. Got to paint up the body. It has got electronics in it, which I'll probably take out and put into this one. And then this one will go into the collection. This one hasn't been driven, so all the underside is in lovely condition. So this is a shelf queen, and then hopefully I'll end up with an RR, and then I'll have the 501X in the collection as well. So there will be a whole video on this one as well. So if you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.